Hello. Everyone can hear me okay? Okay. Thank you so much for coming and listening to me talk and attending Erie Day of Code, in general. So my name is Jenny, and I will be talking to you about the role of the product owner today. So whenever I give a talk, I usually like to issue caveats to cover my ass. So the first one is just a reminder to everyone how important context is. I have very strong opinions and beliefs, and they are largely born out of my own experience. And I'm sure there are people in this room who have had a different set of experiences and thus probably a different set of opinions and beliefs. All are obviously valid. I'm just happy that we're in the room together, learning from each other and telling each other stories. And the second and final caveat is, for those who don't know me, I have a nasty sailor's mouth. Like, I cuss so much, I don't even realize I'm doing it anymore. So I'm going to try really hard to keep it clean today, but something's probably going to slip out, and I apologize in advance. And this slide, this is my favorite slide out of my entire presentation. I was going through a lot of folders and files to prepare for this presentation, and I stumbled across this gem, this written warning that I got at a company that shall not be named to protect the innocent. But look at it. It's basically a write-up because I use profanity excessively and I make lewd comments in my interactions with employees and in presentations. So, yes, thank you. Thank you very much. So consider yourself warned. Okay, so what am I going to be talking about today? So when I finally started working on this presentation, I quickly realized that product owner can mean very different things to different people. So I thought it would be helpful to take a step back and kind of explain to you how I've come to define this role. So we'll be exploring that in part one, and I'll also start part one with a very quick overview of my career experience, just because I think that context is helpful in letting you understand how I've come to define this role over the years. Then we'll take a very quick mental break where I will ply you with pictures of my adorable cats. My husband and I, we have 4 of them. And yes, that is as wonderful and as smelly as you can imagine it. So then in part 2, I will talk about what it actually is like being a product owner on a team primarily composed of technical people, and why that at times does feel a little bit like being a foreigner in a native land. And it can be a little lonely. But that's okay, because then I will talk about tips and tricks that the product owner and the rest of the team can do to kind of bridge that foreigner-native gap. And then I'll end with even more pictures of my cats, because I can. Okay, so career experience. In other words, how did I get here? Okay, this is going to take a while. So in late 2009, I was pursuing a doctorate in art history at Pitt, before I experienced some kind of quarter-life crisis and decided to quit the program. I think in my heart of hearts, I knew that academia was not right for me, largely due to the fact that I lacked the discipline to do it. So it took 9 dark months to actually find a job, and I needed a job. And I finally landed a job at a company called Blue Archer, a local web dev agency. I started as a customer support rep, and I did that for about 6 months. And then I eventually transitioned into a project manager position. I'm forever grateful for that opportunity, because it was my doorway into this industry, and I don't plan on leaving it anytime soon. It was also my first experience with a 9-to-5 schedule, and that is very different from grad school. I mean, I remember going to bed at 4 a.m. and waking up at noon, so that was really, really crazy. And the last thing is the developers at Blue Archer were not in-house, they were offshore, and I knew that future jobs, I really wanted to work in a team where the developers were in-house. So I was only there for about a year, and then I got a job at TrueFit, a software consulting agency. And as you can tell from the crazy names, I kind of jumped around a lot. So as concierge, I provided white glove experience to our customers. As a product accelerator, I would jump onto a team and perform lightweight project managerial tasks. I was also something like a coach or a guide to our customers to explain to them the whole software development process, like the importance of fleshing out requirements and prioritizing features, all that stuff that we are very familiar with. And then as air traffic controller, I kind of helped manage projects at a higher level, especially when it came to reporting and billing. So I have very fond memories of my experience at TrueFit. I kind of leveled up in the sense that I finally learned the theory of dev process. Like I learned that magic word agile, and I took like my first Scrum training session or certification. And the developers were in fact in-house, so I grew to have really, really strong relationships with the developers. And they were very kind and generous with their time, explaining to me about code and explaining to me about process. And another big thing that I learned was, this was an agency, like it was a dev shop, right? And, you would be on a project and you would have to give it up to move on to the next project. And I knew that I really wanted to work on one product to be able to see it grow and evolve. So I was there for a little more than 2 years, and I landed a job at Niche, a local startup. And I was only there for about a year, but what a roller coaster. Like, it's easy to say that that was my most formative experience, my most formative work experience, since. And the reason is because, whereas at TrueFit I was learning the theory of software development practice, Niche was very much about applying that theory within the constraints of practice. My boss at the time basically asked me to build a software development process for our team, and to get our team members on board with it. And I experienced like this range of attitudes where there were some people who were desperate for the process, some people who were neutral who honestly just couldn't care less. And then there were those few who were a little suspicious of my motives because I think ultimately they were afraid I was going to rob them of their autonomy. So it was thrilling and exciting and absolutely terrifying. Like I don't think I slept or ate for like 2 weeks straight. So I was only there for about a year, and I landed a job at my current company, Turnitin, that I'm sure you heard from Chris Winter's talk on Docker Compose. I am now officially a product owner for a product called Revision Assistant. And it is basically a web app that helps students try to improve their writing. And it largely does that by providing instant, automated, formative feedback on students' writing. And I've learned a lot in the year and 9 months that I've been there. I'll tell you about that, in my talk. But the biggest thing that is important for me to say and to stress, it's important for me to see my product grow and evolve over time. But the thing that I also realize that it's important for me to see my own team grow and evolve. And I can't really do that if I keep moving from job to job after 1 or 2 years. So I'm kind of making this decision to be there for the long haul. So I've had a lot of jobs and lots of different titles, right? But regarding roles and responsibilities, there is so much overlap across all these jobs. And at a high level, basically, I'm usually the only non-technical person among a bunch of technical people. My job is to keep projects on track, right? Try to ensure that we're building things on time and that what we're building is as valuable as it can be. I'm responsible for communicating the status of my team's work to internal and external stakeholders. And I will do anything to move development forward. Identifying blockers and getting people into a room so we can make a decision, raising red flags, doing anything from manual QA to writing content to getting on a call with Germany to get a copyright. Anything to shepherd those stories to done, I will be that person. And lastly, I kind of see myself as something like a social lubricant for the team. I think a very important responsibility for a product owner is to be that enthusiastic cheerleader for the team, to lift their spirits up when they need lifting, and to make them feel special because they are in fact special. So just to reiterate, this entire list that I just said of responsibilities absolutely applies to my current job as a product owner. So I want you, here's a little quiz for the audience. I want you to think back to your readings or your trainings on the product owner role. And there is a big responsibility that is usually ascribed to product owners that's not on this list. Would anyone like to take a stab at what that might be? And Anthony, wherever you are, you're not allowed to answer because you were there at the last talk where I gave this. Anyone willing to take a little stab? There's a prize in it for you. Luke. Decision making. Can you go a little bit further about that? Would anyone like to elaborate what Luke just said?
Setting the direction.
Setting the direction of, okay, I will, so basically vision, right? High-level strategy? That's pretty good, yes. Okay. I will give that to you, that's good enough. So the prize is you get a lovely collection of cat butt magnets. So, thank you, Jake. There you go. Yes, you have to give Luke one cat butt magnet for ushering it. Yes, basically vision, right? Controlling the vision of a product, high-level strategy. That's usually, how product owners are defined, right? And I am not responsible for that at all. Not like, don't get me wrong, I do make decisions that influence the high-level strategy and the vision, right? But that is not my primary responsibility, which kind of begs the question, am I really a product owner? Am I like a fake product owner? Am I a lowly project manager? So to help answer this question, I went to a few well-known websites and I kind of lifted how they have defined the product owner role. This one is from Mountain Goat Software, and this is like so good, I'm gonna have to read this out loud to you. So the first quote says, "The Agile PO prioritizes the product backlog during the sprint planning meeting." The second quote says, "The Agile PO should understand the market, the customer, and the business in order to make sound decisions." So let's take a second to unpack what I just read out loud. For the first quote, clearly I'm expected to attend sprint planning meetings, right? I think it's also safe to assume that I probably should attend other meetings like grooming sessions and stand-up and retros, basically participate in all of that, as well as be accountable for the artifacts and the deliverables that come out of those meetings. And then with the second quote, it sounds like I also need to understand the shit out of my domain, right? I need to know markets, right? I need to know business strategy, all that money stuff that I'm very unfamiliar with. I should probably know about my competitors, right? What do they have to offer that my product doesn't? And I should probably understand what my customers want, right? And what their pains are. And if my users are separate from my customers, I need to know that about them too. So I don't know about you guys, but this sounds like a lot of work. So much work, in fact, that Jeff Patton thinks it sounds like a superhero, and from my point of view, it sounds like someone who lives to work. Neither of which are me at all. No, like, period, full stop. I'm a very firm believer in healthy work-life balance. So this kind of, to me, begs the question, oh, shit. Sorry, God, okay. This kind of, I'm so bad with this thing, I like mash it too hard. I'm so sorry. So this kind of begs the question, why does our industry continue to perpetuate this idea that one person is responsible for all of this work? Well, I think the answer is pretty straightforward. It's, we're human. Basically, it's very appealing to have one person responsible for all of that work, because then when your product starts going down the shitter, you have one person to blame. The problem with this theory is that the real world does not actually operate in this way. It's so simple and it's way too clear-cut. The real world is so much messier than this that there's no way just one person is responsible for all this work and all of these decisions, right? So I think it would be beneficial to our industry if we talked about this role in a more nuanced and complex way. Luckily, there are industry leaders out there who agree that one person cannot handle all of this responsibility, and they typically divide up the responsibilities across or along tactical and strategic lines. So again, I'm going to reference Jeff Patton. He wrote this really great blog post a long time ago called The Product Owner and the Product-Shaped Whole, and he uses the metaphor, metaphors, with telescope and microscope to kind of talk about these two different roles. So the strategic product owner, the telescope looks outward, right, into the future. They focus or they care about, what are the future markets, the future problems that need to be solved, future releases. Whereas the microscope, the tactical product owner, they focus inwardly, right, on current work in progress, basically trying to ensure that the team is building on time and that what they're building actually aligns with that higher level strategy. Roman Pichler also has a similar concept with his discrepancy or his difference between a big PO and a small PO. And I hadn't known about this before I researched this talk, so I thought I would challenge myself by kind of talking to you or telling you what I've learned. So I stole this from Pichler's website, and before I kind of begin talking about the big versus the small and what their responsibilities are, I want to explain sort of the overlapping circles, or what Pichler means. So vision is basically, right, your ultimate goal, your true north, right? It's the positive impact that you're trying to make in this world. So the purposes for my job, we are trying to help students improve their writing, right? That's the ultimate goal. And the strategy is the high-level vision, or the high-level plan to realize that vision. So again, for the purposes of my job, we have decided to build a web app that our teachers and students can access. Lastly, the tactics, right? That's basically implementation. It's those delicious, low-level details, typically expressed in epics and user stories and wireframes, right? So as you can see from this diagram, the small product owner, I hate these terms, by the way, small and big. It's a little, makes me uncomfortable. But so the small product owner is primarily responsible for the tactical. And as you can see, the big product owner is responsible for all of it, which goes back to that whole idea, like, where it sounds like a superhero, this is way too much work, right? But Pichler's justification for this is that it makes sense and it is sustainable to employ a big product owner when your product has just launched and it's still in its immature stages. In other words, your product hasn't quite found its market fit just yet. And it only starts to become unsustainable when your product is becoming more mature and is actually growing. So when your product actually reaches that stage, he does now suggest, or one option that he suggests, is this split, again, with a strategic role and a tactical role. But for him, as opposed to Patton, he thinks like a product manager or chief product owner will primarily handle the strategic, and then a product owner will handle the tactical responsibilities. So in theory, I agree with this. I really do. But I have some beef with it, of course, because I always have beef with things. My problem with this diagram is that, let me go back to this slide really quickly. Something that he says that I think is very, very powerful is that he says the vision guides the strategy and the strategy informs the tactics. But what makes what he says even more powerful is that the reverse is also true. The tactics inform the strategy as well as the vision. So if we're going to split these roles into two, there needs to be a very tight feedback loop between these two roles, right? In fact, I think it necessitates such a strong, tight feedback loop that I think that there is an overlap in responsibilities. There isn't this clear-cut line between the two. So I suggest that it looks more like this, a Venn diagram, where there are responsibilities that the strategic and tactical product owners primarily handle, but there's some middle ground, right? A set of responsibilities that are co-owned between these two types of roles. For instance, stakeholder management. I absolutely can see a world where the tactical product owner manages the relationships with, say, the customer support reps and the account managers, and the strategic product owner manages the relationships with the money people, the finance people, and the sales reps. And both product owners kind of handle the relationship with the marketing team. Another really good example is user expert. I think it's absolutely ridiculous to put that in either one as primary, because knowing what your users want, right, what their pains are, absolutely informs the low level as well as the high level. So I think this is just a more realistic illustration of how these responsibilities are, how they look. So I've never been a strategic product owner, and I gotta be honest with you, I don't think I ever want to, but I came up with this list of pros and cons for each one. So for the strategic product owner, which I like to call or define having the big picture of the bigger picture, so those who are interested expect to travel a lot for a bunch of different reasons. I think the easiest one is you're gonna have to like travel to customer or user sites, right? To understand what they want, to understand what their pains are. You're probably also going to have to travel to, to go to like states with sales reps because they're about to like win this big deal, and you have to come in and basically sell your product, right? And do your little product dance. You're also probably going to have to travel to go to workshops and conferences and symposia to sell the product as well as evangelize that vision. Second, as a strategic product owner, you're going to really have to know your domain. And you're not only going to have to know your own domain really well, but you're going to have to know tangential domains too. So take, for instance, revision assistant. Not only would I have to know the world of ed tech really, really well, I would have to know the world of secondary education equally well. And you have to gain that kind of expertise, which means that you have to do a lot of reading and research. And I've already talked about domain and competitor, blah, blah, blah. Okay, the third, I do think that it's harder to find this type of job because you are marrying experience building software with years and years of expertise in a particular domain, right? It's hard to kind of find that combination. And again, it's super important to have both, because if you're going to develop a vision, right, a vision for your product, you're going to have that expertise as your nuts and bolts. On the flip side, the tactical product owner, which I like to call having the big picture of the little picture, I think having this job, it's more industry agnostic. Now, don't get me wrong, clearly I'm knowing something about the ed tech world and secondary education, right? And it's absolutely influenced how I make decisions in my current job. I think what I'm trying to say is I think a tactical product owner can move from job to job the way a software developer can. Second, every team needs a PO. They just do. You're gonna have to herd those cats, right? And I get it, the builders on a team, they are so, they get super focused on their slice of work, and sometimes it's hard to kind of step back and see the team as a whole, and I think part of my job is to remind them of that whole team view and ways that we can improve the team. Third, the delicious team bubble. So I'll explain this one by way of a story. So my high school photography teacher, this was a long time ago, he was complaining to me about sort of the bureaucracy and the red tape of the Atlanta public school system and how terrible it is. And he was really close to quitting, but he decided not to because he said to me that he could close the door to his classroom, shut out all that noise, and just be able to be with his students, be in his domain, and teach. And I think that applies to my job very, very much. Let's be honest here. Stakeholders be crazy sometimes, right? Upper management can operate in confusing and mysterious ways. But I try very hard not to let that get to me, because the majority of my time is spent with one team, and we're just goofy, nerdy, having fun, trying to get our shit done, right? And lastly, you can kind of see this as a pro and or a con, probably as a double-edged sword, where I do think that it's easier to take on this kind of role when you have an extroverted personality. You just have to be that cheerleader, enthusiastic, positive light, especially when your team isn't feeling super, super high. So this split between the tactical and the strategic, it can be very easy if your company decides to do this or your team decides to do this, to experience some traps, right? One very obvious one is the strategic and the tactical product owner, they're not aligned, right? And that can be very dangerous because the tactical product owner could implement features that actually aren't aligned with that high-level strategy, and that's no bueno. So the way to avoid that trap, right, the way to avoid that problem is whoever is owning the vision and the strategy of your product, get to know that person like the back of your hand. Know how she thinks, know how she works, what she likes, what she doesn't like. It's funny, the person that plays that role at my current job, I always joke with her that she's sort of the brains of a two-headed monster and I'm the arms. Second, another trap is the strategic product owner is actually the one making all of the decisions, which can suck, right? Because that means that the tactical product owner is reduced to just pushing stories, to done, and that can be very demoralizing. So the way to avoid doing that is to figure out the decisions that you can make at your company, and I do think that it changes from company to company. So take, for instance, my job. Let's say we're trying to figure out if next quarter my team is going to be building a very pretty usage report for administrators, or will they be building a brand new assignment type for teachers and students. That is not my decision to make. Now, I think my responsibility is to talk to the strategic people and tell them the pros and cons of going each route, but that's not my decision to make. Decisions that I think that I am responsible for making are let's say, for instance, we're nearing the end of a quarter, and I have this delicious surprise that there are 2 developers that have a few weeks of free time. Yes, it is absolutely my job to kind of figure out what work that they'll be doing that will fill up that time. Okay, that is part 1. So as promised, here's a nice little mental break. On the left is Evie in the forefront and Sid in the back. I like to caption this 2 cats, 2 sinks. And then the one on the right, that's Kamala and Sid fighting. And they're doing it because they love each other. It's true, but it's very, very entertaining. Okay, part 2. Now that I've talked about how I define the product owner role ad nauseum, now I want to talk about what it's actually like being a product owner on a team primarily made up of technical people. So why does it feel like a foreigner? Why does it feel sometimes like being the outsider? Well, so the answers are pretty straightforward. The first one is I'm not a builder, right? I'm the one on the team asking other people to build things. And because of that, the nature and scope of my work is very different from the rest of the teams. Second, there's usually only one product owner per team, right? So there isn't a nearby product owner where I can kind of talk shop with, vent my frustrations, ask for advice, that kind of thing. But developers in the room, the most important reason why it feels like being a foreigner in a native land is because when y'all speak, I have no idea what you're saying at all. Y'all sound like aliens, or I'm the one that sounds like an alien. So for this talk, the past few weeks, I've been listening very closely to developer conversations, and I plucked out 3 of them that begin with the letter D just to make my point. So one example is dependency injection. Doesn't that sound like a medical procedure gone wrong? Another one, and this is just my love to Chris Winters, Docker compose. I swear to cats, I heard that phrase at stand-up every day for 3 weeks. And then my favorite one is, what is it? It's a Django validation with serializer. What does that fucking mean? I mean, seriously. The only thing I think about when I hear that phrase is obviously the Tarantino film, right? It's just very, very hard to understand what you guys are saying. So now let's shift the conversation and talk about tips and tricks that the team can do to get around this problem, right? This language problem. How can we develop some kind of common dialect so that we can understand each other? So the first suggestion is that product owners should try to learn the technical lingo. Now, how can we do this? So I do it by way of this phrase that I call Jenny-splaining, which is basically just code for explaining something in layman's terms. But this is the way it usually happens. So I'll ask a developer a question, or a developer is explaining something to me, and they're throwing those $5 technical words that I just don't understand. So I'll be like, nope, sorry, just, please, can you Jenny explain this for me? And it's successful. Like I would say for the past few years, a lot of people have complimented me on my ability to speak up and ask questions when I don't understand things. Or maybe they're just very impressed that I am not afraid to look stupid or dumb or ignorant in front of anyone. But I will be honest with you up here. If I asked a question every time I didn't understand something, we would get nothing done. We would get nothing done, right? So, like, this is sort of the problem that I'm experiencing, where on the one hand, I have to have some level of technical understanding, right? But on the other hand, I can't monopolize all of the developers' time so that they can just explain things to me ad nauseum, right? So how do we come to some kind of middle ground? And one suggestion that I propose is that we come together to build a super shoddy bridge, right? A bridge that we build together that is far from perfect and honestly sometimes even structurally sound. So I have a really good story to illustrate this. This was a while back. The front-end team had come together and they made this decision to clean up some cruft. And they got together, they wrote a bunch of stories, and they shoved it into the backlog. And then they met with me to walk me through those stories and kind of explain to me the nature and scope of that work. And this lovely story, which should really be an epic, that's what they said, this story was like the white whale that they wanted to start with. And when I read the name, or the title of this story, the only word I understood was Ptolemy. And that's only because I knew that was the name of a repo. So at the very least, I knew like where in the app they were wanting to like clean up some code. So they meet with me, and they're really doing their best to Jenny-splain. Oh my God, they're very sweet. And so I'm like listening intently, and I'm like furiously writing down my notes. And then I like get to this point where I think I can reiterate back what they said. And I said something along the lines of, oh, I see what you're trying to do. You're basically like trying to put code in the right folders, right? And they were like, yeah, that sounds kind of right, which of course is totally not true, completely inaccurate. They were just trying to massage my ego. So we weren't really getting anywhere with that conversation, but we decided to pivot and ask the question in a different way, which was to talk about the benefits of the work. And that's when they said that it would minimize side effects. And I was like, go on. And they basically said that by making this effort and doing this work, it would give them more confidence that when they would modify the code, it would prevent them from breaking other areas of the app. So of course I heard that and I was like, hurrah, yes, that's the clincher. I'm on board with this. Let's do this work, right? So I wanted to, of course, know the technical details, but there were other stories that we had to kind of go through, so we moved on. I think it's safe to say that, like with the kind of person that I am not going to understand the technical the way a native does. It's just not going to happen. It's just not. But I think what I want to stress is what's important for me to learn is to know when I need to know the technical details to something and when I don't. For the purposes of this context, all I really needed to know what the impact of that work would be, and then we could move on. And it's not like I can't learn the technical details later, right? So this is where it's good to be somewhat organized and to take decent notes. You're not going to be able to read this chicken scratch, but this is basically a snippet of the notes that I took in that front-end meeting. And at the bottom it says, get rid of global variables, spaghetti code. And that was already the first attempt at my developers trying to Jenny-splain what this story was about. So much later on, I pinged Rachel, a front-end dev, to basically give me another round of Jenny-splanation and talk to me about what global variables are. And she did this really nice job of kind of giving me a high-level explanation. And she went even further. We met for like half an hour, and she whiteboarded an example of something that she had been recently working on so that we could apply this high-level concept to some pseudocode. And I really wanted to show that whiteboarding exercise, but it wasn't syntactically correct, so Rachel was like, please don't post it. So to substitute, here's a lovely picture of me and Rachel. And this is such a special picture because we're actually taking shots of her breast milk, and it was quite delicious. It's a very long story, but I'll tell you about it at the brewery. Yes. Okay, so to kind of quickly recap this whole process that I just walked you through for Jenny-splaining, this is like the process in which it happens. First, Developer explains something to me or tells me something, right? I'm listening furiously, I'm taking notes, I'm trying to make sure to capture what I think I should capture. Then after having digested it for a few minutes, I take a stab at repeating back what I think I heard, often failing miserably. Then we decide to pivot and we talk about the work in a very different way. We're talking about the impact of the work, right? How does this affect the overall product? What are the pros? What are the cons, right? What are the drawbacks? And based on that conversation, we make a decision together, which of course is great, right? Because we're always trying to move development forward. And then much later on, I ask my developer husband or a dev at lunch to give me another round of Jenny-splanation. Okay, second tip. Developers must learn how to speak jargon-free. Okay, so there are a lot of languages out there, right? And I'm pretty sure that nearly all of the developers I have come to meet are polyglots, lately. In other words, you have mastered multiple languages fluently. And I think, in this larger context, the reason why you are valued and valuable is because you take that expertise in those languages and you use them as a tool, to help build that digital world. Please don't hate me for saying this, but I argue that that's not enough. Now, let me explain myself. Mastering technical languages absolutely makes you a good developer, but what makes you a great developer is your ability to translate your work in a way to non-technical people that is both approachable and meaningful. You must be able to translate your work. And there are so many ways, there are so many techniques and methods that you can employ to help with that translation effort. For example, whiteboarding. Whiteboarding is such an amazing and wonderful exercise. And don't get me wrong, I think people think that this is a lot easier than it actually is. I think it requires a lot of effort and practice to get good at whiteboarding. But the reason why I like it so much is that you can diagram something out and take a picture of it to use it as reference for later. So on the left, we have David. He's part of the research team. And he made this really cute diagram to show me and a handful of other people sort of the machine learning bits to a grammar tool that his team was building. And the screenshot on the right, this is old school, this is from Niche. My boss at the time, he basically spelled out the entire application architecture and listed out the responsibilities for each service. I reference that a lot. Second tip regarding translation efforts, use simple examples with familiar subject matter. So this is from a while back. I kept hearing this phrase, "git rebasing at work." I was like, what is that? So then I, that night, asked my developer husband, Chris, can you explain to me what git rebasing is? And so he drew this diagram out, and I don't think you're going to be able to understand it. But obviously, this is not the way real code looks. And obviously, this is not the way real code looks like in master. But he knew that he had to kind of remove those details for me to focus on the core concepts. The other smart thing that he did was use our cats as examples. That's super smart because that is something that I need to kind of help me to keep concentrating and really focus in on what I'm trying to learn. Super helpful. And so again, I was flipping through a lot of old notebooks, and I found this, and both of us, me and my husband, we didn't even remember that we had this conversation, which is hilarious because I wrote a little note to myself and was apparently horrified that rebasing was essentially rewriting history. So horrified, in fact, that I had to then immediately tweet my coworker, Chris Winters, mourning the loss of historical truth. I think this is just the art history in me. Don't worry, I think rebasing is a very great idea. Also, you're not actually rewriting history, which makes it a lot better. Third, so I've already kind of explained this one with my front-end team example, but this is the one that I really want to nail. Explain the impact. Tell me about the benefits of this work, right? What are the pros? What are the cons? And this is another example from Niche. apparently the developer Cochran was going to work on a super secret data pipeline project. And obviously I don't understand what data pipeline means. I don't know that, right? But I did write this one line that said, because Jeff gets weekly requests to change a name or a fact, so doing just this would be enough. So even though I don't understand anything about data pipeline, blah, 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 I knew that by doing this work, Jeff, a very important developer, his time would have been saved doing these manual tasks every week. And lastly, just brace yourselves, people. Developers, you're gonna have to repeat yourself, sometimes multiple times. And it's not just because technical concepts are hard. They're very hard for people like me, like liberal arts majors. It's because I can learn a concept, a technical concept, and get it down, right? But because I don't actually use it at work, it's so easy to forget this kind of stuff. It's like that old adage, if you don't use it, you lose it. That is absolutely applicable here. So, I apologize in advance. Just know that you're going to have to repeat yourselves. So now I'm going to go even further with my claim and say that this effort, this translation effort to kind of translate the technical to the non-technical, this ability to move nimbly between the technical world, and the world that the rest of us live in, I argue that it is your responsibility as developers to do this. So what's my justification for making this claim? Well, the first one is the majority of the people that you work with are not technical. They're like me, right? Ooh. And like everyone else, you should be able to talk about the work that you're doing in an approachable and meaningful way. And I don't want to dive into stereotypes, but I do think that people think that if you become a developer, it means that you don't have to talk to people. And that could not be further from the truth. In fact, it's the opposite, right? You have to communicate more because it's technical people and non-technical people coming together, and we all have to be on the same page. So that translation effort is super important. Second, developers, you're not actually being paid to write code per se. You're actually being paid to build a product. Now, again, don't misinterpret me. I totally get that developers, you do love writing code. I love that you love writing code. You're very lucky to enjoy doing what you like doing, right? But that doesn't mean that you can just stay in your technical bubble and not make an effort to understand the product that you are building from a user's perspective. And lastly, this rare combination of insane technical chops with the ability to translate the technical to non-technical people. Do you know how fucking powerful that is? You might as well be walking on water. Everyone will love you, everyone will want to work with you, and if you are on a team and you are lucky enough to have this kind of person on your team, don't let that person go. So I'm going to end this little section and ask the same question that I asked in the beginning, but ask developers in the room to kind of take a step back and realize that there are other languages that you should be learning along with the technical ones. Okay, we're at the home stretch, people. The last one, the team should know the product. So, think of a typical Scrum team, right? You've got UX, you've got developers, you've got QA, you've got a product owner, right? We all know our own native languages, and we're not going to be fluent in each other's languages. And that's okay. But what is the thing that actually brings us together? What binds us as a team? What is our lingua franca? And I argue that it is the product, right? Literally, the only reason we are even a team is because of this product, right? And because of that, I think that everyone on the team should understand how that product works. I'm not saying that you need to know every single edge case, every single use case, right? But I think every product has 3 or 4 basic workflows. I absolutely think that every team member should know those workflows, those basic workflows. And I think team members should not only know the product, but they should also know how to speak about the product, not just to stakeholders, but to ourselves as a team, right? So things like acceptance criteria and steps to replicate a bug, or making a little animation to show a workflow. I think these are all things that we need to learn and get better at and improve. And lastly, another thing that binds us together is not just the product, right? The end prize, the product. It's also the process in which we get there. And I just encourage everyone, especially the builders, to take a step back and to always be critical of the process by which you build that product, but not just be critical, but to actually come up with solutions and ideas to strengthen that process. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening.